welcome to our audience and to our panelists for another installment of Old Line Government Affairs webinar called Understanding State Procurement in Maryland. Old Line Government Affairs is a subsidiary of the law firm Nefos Brow, which is a corporate boutique firm, and Old Line Government Affairs is the preeminent government affairs consulting firm in the state. We help clients develop and implement strategies pertaining to legislative and executive and regulatory matters. My name is Brett Leininger, and I'm the managing director for Old Line Government Affairs, and we're happy to have you with us. And Joe?
Thank you, Brett. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our program today. I'm Joe Metashevsky. Many people know me as American Joe. I'm happy to be here today. I'm the Senior Government Affairs Director at Old Line Government Affairs, and we are bringing this program to you because we feel its level of importance and the need among businesses who want to do business with the state. There is a wealth of knowledge out there that you can tap into, and we hope to bring you some aspects of that for your understanding.
Great. Thanks, Joe. With that, we'll do some brief introductions to our esteemed panelists. I don't think one has shown up yet, but perhaps she will. Bob Gleason is the Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Maryland. And Mr. Gleason is charged with modernizing and transforming the state's procurement processes and really just running the whole program from a reformation standpoint as well. He formerly held a role as Maryland's senior procurement executive, and prior to that served as the senior procurement officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. It looks like we have Valerie joining us. He's over 25 years in public and private purchasing and is a U.S. certified public purchasing officer. And we're very happy to have Bob with us today, and also in the state of Maryland in such an important role. Joe?
Well, thank you, Brett. And I do want to also add, I know Bob probably doesn't want me to maybe even say this, but I want to thank you for your service in the U.S. Army. And I very much appreciate everything that you do. Joanna Keeley is my introductor, I guess. Joanna is the Assistant for Public Policy of Board of Public Works Liaison for the State Treasurer's Office. Joanna is, she investigates, analyzes, and provides advice for agenda items and attends briefings, and also deals with a broader public policy issues. She serves as a liaison to the General Assembly for matters concerning the Board of Public Works, and she represents the treasurer on multiple boards and committees such as the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation and the Green Purchasing Committee. Joanna, welcome, and thank you for helping us with this program today. I appreciate it.
And additionally, we have Valerie Radomski, who is the Board of Public Works liaison to the governor's office. Previously, she was a teacher for Baltimore County Schools and has a very unique background in that regard. Additionally, she was the director for the Office of Education Accountability in the governor's office for children, and also spent 3 years at the comptroller's office as the education policy advisor and Board of Public Works coordinator. So welcome, Valerie.
And I am introducing Ann Clace, Assistant Comptroller for the state of Maryland and the liaison to the Board of Public Works for the Comptroller of the state of Maryland, Peter Francho. Ann is also a member of the Maryland Public Art Commission, which oversees Maryland Public Art Initiative, the Percent for Art program for state-owned buildings. She has worked on several political campaigns and has assisted in fundraising for various state and federal candidates, and worked at the office of Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and in the Salisbury University's Government Relations Office. So, Ann, welcome. Thank you for helping us today with the program.
Thank you.
So before we get into some of the interaction with our panelists, we thought it'd be a good idea to give some background and some context about Maryland's procurement process. It's very unique. really one of a kind in the whole country, at least at the state level. Give you some history here. Created in 1825 as a 9-member body, that lasted until it was abolished in 1828, where eventually was replaced by in the Constitution of 1851 as 4 commissioners of the Board of Public Works, which was popularly elected to represent 4 regional districts of Maryland. In 1864, it was established as a 3-member Board of Public Works, including the governor, comptroller, and the state treasurer, which is what we have today. So the highest administrative body in Maryland state government, and the modern mission of the board is best summed up as protecting and enhancing the state's fiscal integrity by ensuring that significant state expenditures are necessary and appropriate, fiscally responsible, fair, and lawful. They meet semi-monthly, about every 2 weeks, in which they review and vote on agency proposals. And the board's powers and duties are granted through the statute by the General Assembly, and as well stated in the state constitution. Joe?
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to talk briefly about the responsibilities of the Board of Public Works. It controls procurement policy, adopts procurement regulations, and approves most contracts exceeding $200,000. It can and does debar vendors from entering contracts with the state when the vendor has been convicted, or the vendor's participation will adversely affect the integrity of the procurement process. It also approves grant agreements and certifies matching grants for legislative bond initiatives and any program that uses general obligation bonds, such as the Department of Housing and Community Development lending programs. So this is, it also applies to any program that uses general obligation bonds. But to me, over the years of watching the Board of Public Works, and I've shared this with people often, is that their oversight for the Wetlands Administration. I just think that's fascinating. They process tidal wetlands license applications. They hold hearings. They prepare recommendations. They issue tidal wetlands licenses after the board approval. They coordinate with our other agencies and landowners and the public, and they seek to preserve and manage the state's tidal wetlands for the benefit of its citizens by balancing the various ecological, economical, developmental, recreational, and aesthetic values of the tidal wetlands activities. And I've witnessed this myself. I was just taken aback. I was there for another issue where they took up a community organization's dispute along the waterway, along the Chesapeake Bay shoreline. And it was fascinating to watch. So we're here to try to give you a little bit of the background and the width and the breadth of what BPW does before we get to our Q&A. Brett?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Basically, just to give an additional sketch of kind of the procurement units that have jurisdiction over state procurements: the State Treasurer's Office, Department of General Services, or commonly referred to as DGS here in Maryland, Department of Transportation, the Maryland Transportation Authority, Maryland Port Commission, and then there are some other primary procurement units, and they have dollar amount thresholds that's set in regulation by the Board of Public Works. The Department of General Services covers a wide array of issues: capital construction improvement contracts, architectural and engineering contracts, maintenance contracts, commodities. I mean, they really cover a broad spectrum. Department of Transportation, as you can imagine, transportation related construction, capital construction, architectural and engineering, maintenance, equipment contracts, and including capital expenditure contracts in connection with state roads, bridges, or highways. The treasurers has banking, investment, and other financial service contracts, as well as insurance and insurance-related services contracts. And then there's the Maryland Port Administration, and that is dealing with all the things involving the port. There are also 3 additional primary procurement units that are not control agencies: the University of Maryland, University System of Maryland, USM, Morgan State University, and St. Mary's College of Maryland. Joe?
Brett, I'm going to cover the Procurement Improvement Council because there is a wide swath of authority that the board has, and it covers an immense amount of territory. The Improvement Council was created in 2017 by House Bill 1021, and it's a 12-member council established obviously by the General Assembly, and it provides a forum for discussion of procurement issues and problems. And the members, and this is important, is the state treasurer, secretaries of the governor's office of small, minority, and women business affairs, transportation, budget and management, information technology, and general services. The chancellor of the University of Maryland system is a member. There's a procurement advisor, director of the governor's office of performance improvement, 1 local government member, and 2 members of the public. And the Improvement Council advises the board on procurement process and makes recommendations for improving state procurements. And it meets at least quarterly each year. Before I go into the next part, I do want to say there's no shortage of procurement legislation in any session of the Maryland General Assembly. And the Procurement Improvement Council is essential to provide an ongoing, open, and candid examination of the process to ensure fair and equitable opportunities for all qualified participants. And we're just trying, the state is trying to keep everybody in the corral. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that we're all reading from the same sheet music. That's what we have to be doing. So another important commission that was established was the Commission to Modernize State Procurement. And that has 19 members, and the chair is our Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford. And it reviews Maryland's procurement statutes, the regulations, the policies, the procedures, and it made 57 recommendations divided into 5 sections, and I'll just touch on them briefly, but the sections are important. It enhances the procurement process to attract more participation. I personally believe more participation invites more innovation and more price competition. I think it's streamlining the architect and engineering services also is a step in the right direction, because some of these procurements, the RFPs that are written are extremely complex, and we need to kind of like get these understandable at a level at a conversant level for the people that are participating. Expanding small and minority business opportunities is incredibly important. That's most helpful in enabling growth and participation in the procurement process. Developing qualified procurement personnel. Ongoing professional education is essential to maintain high standards within the state bureaucracy. And updating procurement oversight and structure. It's a complex system. It requires scrutiny to avoid past lapses. So I will leave you with that thought, turn it back over to Brett.
Thank you. All right, so this is the last bit of background, but a very important one for folks who are listening today and watching. EMaryland Marketplace Advantage, or EMA, is the online procurement system that is really a wonderful tool for companies, vendors looking to do business with the state of Maryland. It's been improved dramatically, I'm sure, under Bob Gleason's direction, and it's very robust. The majority of Maryland procurement contracts go through EMA. It's posted there. Their mission is to ensure Maryland procures the highest quality materials, equipment, supplies, and services of every description essential to needs enabled through the state's centralized e-procurement process. From the vendor standpoint, there's an MBE program, Minority Business Enterprise Program, women-owned and other. State's overall goal for MBE participation is 29% of the dollar value of each agency's total procurements through direct or indirect MBE participation. Vendors have to meet all the requirements. They go through a process which is administered at the Maryland Department of Transportation's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. And there's a whole competitive sealed proposals process, RFPs, best and final offers. Any of you on the webinar, or probably who have done this, are very familiar with all this kind of terminology, and those who are not, but are looking to do business with the state certainly will become familiar very soon. So with that, I think we can get into the meat and start asking do a little Q&A. Joe?
Sure. I'd like to offer the first question to Mr. Gleason. In the 5 sections that I mentioned just before I turned it over to Brett, one of the sections was developing qualified procurement personnel. And my first question, it's very, very simple, but currently, does Maryland require continuing ed for its procurement officers?
That may be a question for Bob.
Yep.
As a matter of practice, we do now.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, previously, it was hit or miss depending on the individual agency and the leadership that existed and what they required, what they expected of staff. But sort of across the enterprise, across the state, across the executive branch and state government, not really. And so it was left up to the individual to do what they needed to do to improve their skills. But now, as a consequence of the transformation and the development of our our establishment that we have now through the Office of State Procurement, which is the control authority under DGS, we have created a procurement academy of one person, Dr. Victoria Steger. We had originally planned for it to be 3 people. I think the district has 5 people. Commonwealth of Virginia has 4 or 5. Every state has a training group. But the certification requires, it only goes for a certain period of time. So there's a need for continuing education, continuing training as the certification expires or has to be renewed. You have to qualify and provide evidence, documentation of sort of the continuing education that you've had. This is going to be a Maryland specific certification because, as you mentioned in the front end, Maryland's very unique. So you can do procurement, public procurement in a city, a town, a county, or a different state, and it's all different. So the rules, the processes are different, even though the fundamental principles are the same. But we need people to be trained and certified the way Maryland does business. And I would also add that in the future, our intent is to train and certify our suppliers to make sure that our suppliers are prepared, ready, willing, able, competent to do business with us. Just like any large private sector company, Johnson & Johnson, GM, Ford, they all have a training program for suppliers in their ecosystem. So that's on the radar too. So I'll stop there.
Well, that's great news, and that's great to know because having to train competitors when they come in is not the job of the state, number one, but having competent competitors and competent evaluators would make the whole system go a lot more smoothly and more efficiently. My next question is preferences for awarding points to in-state contractors abound around the country. Current Maryland law permits the Department of General Services to give a local preference to in-state contractors. Do you feel the preference is being utilized as much as it can be, or if you have any awareness of what DGS is doing? Because there's a law that passed that if Maryland, if a competitive, let's just say an architectural firm from Wisconsin comes into Maryland and they give Wisconsin architects a competitive edge at home, the law permits Maryland to give that competitive edge here to local contractors. And my question is if you are aware of how much they're using, do you feel it needs to be utilized more, or is it being utilized fairly and enough at this time?
I did a little bit of research, thanks for kind of giving me the questions in advance. It allowed me to do a little bit of research, and I couldn't find that. That's sort of a reciprocity provision that every state has. And it's especially important for businesses and suppliers that are sort of peripherally, adjacent to other states and jurisdictions, so that there's no penalty for companies that might need to travel 2 miles into another state. So typically we don't invoke those sorts of things unless other states have invoked it. So it's sort of you remember the old expression, mutually assured destruction?
Yes.
Mad. So, people sort of withdraw from that, but there are politicians and legislators, at every level, local and state, that sort of want to promote or advocate for their own specific jurisdiction. I remember hearing a story one time about Montgomery County and how, the Board of Supervisors required they had to build a firehouse using only a Montgomery County company. Well, the price went through the roof. And then they called in procurement and said, hey, how come this is so expensive when the next county built the same kind of a firehouse and it cost half as much? Well, it's because you guys passed a preference for a local contractor. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there, but there's always going to be some local, for example, Virginia had a coal preference. They didn't want to buy coal from West Virginia if you could buy coal from a Virginia mine, right? So there's going to be some of these nuance there, but I'm not aware of any specific preference other than the reciprocal preference.
Right. The reciprocity is particularly what I was concerned about here.
And that's kind of a universal thing, but I don't know that I've heard. Of course, I can still claim that I'm new, right? I've only been here a couple of years. I'm the new kid on the block. So I'm not aware of any historical challenge with the reciprocity preference, but I could be wrong, and I'll leave that to others.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. How important is reaching out to Maryland companies within our procurement process? How can Maryland be more proactive soliciting, here we go with like local contractors to compete for state contracts, trying to keep the business in Maryland, if you will? Bob,
Well, I mean, we have Board of Public Works representation here, so if they would like to speak, that's certainly fine. I don't want to hog this, but I think it's very important that we, from an economic development perspective, that we make sure that our businesses have an opportunity and they're prepared, they're trained, they're able, they're competent, they're ready, they're certified as small businesses. If they're veteran, if they're a minority, we need to make sure that we prepare them to be very competitive. But beyond that, I mean, that's what I call market making too, which is another concept that is somewhat new here. But I'll stop there and leave that to others to talk.
Would any of our other guests like to jump in on that? No. Okay. Let me ask you one more, and then I'll turn it over to Brett. It seems like agencies don't often live up to the procurement standards that we expect. Is there a way to make sure that they abide by the rules, incentives, and any kind of retribution, but because they're not living up to the procurement standards? I mean, sometimes we hear some horror stories that things just didn't go the way you expect them to go, and sometimes they take a left turn when you expect it to be on a straight highway. And
well, let me just say this: when I read the question. So this highway that you refer to, it's a two-way street, right?
Right.
It's bi-directional. So, you could substitute suppliers for agencies to the extent that suppliers don't live up to, needs. So, there's plenty of opportunity here for both agency procurement officers to be better. And frankly, we're turning our attention now to the agencies. We spent the last year, the pandemic really, talk about a left turn. The pandemic just threw us into a complete turmoil with regards to transformation. And we couldn't focus on building our state enterprise procurement function the way that the House bill had required and what the administrative work plan required us to do. But now that we've kind of built the Office of State Procurement, now we can start working with our agencies to build the capabilities, the skills, the qualifications, the competencies within the agencies. So to your point, where there's an absence or maybe a limitation on the capabilities within agencies, we're now focused on training them, getting them certified as Maryland certified procurement officers. And I think you're going to see a change, but you can't flip a switch on October 1 and say, okay, the world's fixed. We passed the legislation, everything's fine. Well, this is a journey. It's a transformative journey. And honestly, I used to call it Vision 2025. Sometimes I think about Vision 2030 now sometimes, but it is going to be a point where we establish a better way for agencies to be able to work with suppliers so that they can rely on us to make sure that, we're doing things the right way.
Well, Bob, thanks for your candor. I appreciate that. And I'll turn it over.
And Joe, I would just add, I think the fact that the Board of Public Works is such a very open and transparent forum, it allows for the members to publicly question agencies, on performance goals and performance measures, which certainly brings to light any issues relating to, standards being met. So, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a punishment, but I think the fact that it's such a transparent forum, there's certainly an opportunity there for the members to publicly, question agencies to make sure that, performance goals and standards are being met.
Yeah. And I would just add, I don't think it's the living up to procurement standards. I would say what more along the lines of what Bob has said, that procurement is really complicated. And it took me 2 years just to sort of go, oh, okay, I sort of get it. And then, but it's just a matter of training the folks. The only sort of things that we run into is by the time the item gets to the board is that sometimes the items are written for that particular person and they're not always easy to understand. Our procurement advisor does a great job of pointing out things to the agencies ahead of time saying you need to change this. And then we have meetings with DGS and MDOT before the meetings to go over the draft agenda. So I think that's really helpful to make sure that they don't have to submit 20 revisions to an agenda item.
If I could add something very quickly to that question. I don't know if any of you have heard of the National Contract Management Association, NCMA. It's more of a federal orientation, but they have a magazine, Contract Management Magazine, and I remember maybe 2017, 2018, there was an article, and think of a box. If you can imagine a box, and within that box, there's everything in there that you have to do: law, regulations, requirements, everything that the public body requires you to do, you must do. And then beyond that, it's almost like a box within a box. Beyond that box, there are practices. And this is where leadership comes into play, where if there are discretionary ways of practicing procurement that are more innovative, more new, more open, and many procurement professionals are trained to follow a process. Process is a funny thing. Too often processes are put in place and the process becomes the goal as opposed to accomplishing the goal that the processes were put in place in the first place for. So if you can somehow get people to think beyond the small box and then go into the bigger box, because essentially our goal is to provide goods and services to the public body, state agencies, for them to accomplish their missions, which have to do with natural resources, health, education, transportation, all of the things that the state has to do. We have to provide them goods and services through a contract for them to do what they have to do. So for procurement officers to think beyond the process into the bigger box of what's within their discretion to manage the process to ensure that there's an outcome that gets them good contracts with good suppliers in a way that, manages what needs to be managed within that commercial relationship. So I'll stop there, but just some added context there.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
That's great. So we've talked about kind of what's been going on, what the vision is kind of throughout all this reform process. And the schedule of each of the liaisons is pretty hectic, in my opinion. They meet every other week, basically. I guess maybe I'll start with Valerie. She hasn't spoken yet. Hopefully everything's working. I know she had some technical.
I hope so.
Yes, we can hear you, so that's good. So maybe just from your vantage point, Valerie, what are the weeks like leading up to the BPW meeting and afterwards? It'd be great perspective.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty hectic. Luckily, we get an early look at DGS and MDOT's agendas, to meet with the liaisons and procurement advisor in advance. As we have feedback, we don't always understand. I mean, there's so many agencies and the agenda items. It's not just the procurement, it's also their operations and policies that we need to understand to be able to evaluate each item. So, to be able to ask the questions in advance and give everyone time to kind of put it into our language, probably especially with the IT items. There's so many acronyms, and the whole idea that we've all worked together, very hard to achieve, is that any member of the public can get online and can understand those items to make it more accessible. So that's what we all, putting our heads together, try to achieve. And the agencies, that gives them more time, because then, so the agenda for the March 24th is published this afternoon and meeting 12 days from now. So we send questions, agencies get back to us in a few days. There's often follow-up questions, and the more we can get, resolved that we can understand, the better off everyone is.
That's great. Thank you. Joanna, you want to comment? Just kind of.
Well, my time is very much like Valerie's. The only sort of thing I would add is that we do get requests for meetings. You may have already said that. We get requests for meetings from the agencies. We have a standing meeting the week before the Board of Public Works meeting to have agencies come in and talk about items that might be a little more controversial or complicated. And then I also, in addition to that, I will send out notices to the General Assembly about capital grants, DNR items, just to let them know that there's a district specific item coming, and then we'll hear normally back, thank you, or please tell the treasurer, please say my name at the Board of Public Works meeting, like they do sometimes. And then I just, the treasurer, I can't speak for the other two, but the treasurer's extremely she does not need a lot of telling her what I think. I mean, she normally, I try and put together sort of like a overview of the issue, and this is what this person said, this is what this person says. And when she gets into the meeting, she decides what to do. But a lot of my time is just spent making sure that I've kind of researched the item as much as I can, and hopefully not, give her wrong information, which, I hope never do. But that's pretty much it. So
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Ann?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they pretty much covered it, but I would just say there's a lot of collaboration between the three of us, or all of us, and then board staff as well. We're constantly communicating back and forth. Valerie does a great job too at times, sometimes pushing state agencies to respond faster to questions. So we always appreciate that as well. But we certainly all do work very closely together, and are probably communicating multiple times a day back and forth with one another. So,
right.
But it's helpful because we all learn a lot from each other, as well as we're preparing our analysis and, providing information to our principals. So,
right. And I will say the Board of Public Works staff are transitioning from a regular meeting to a virtual meeting was a real big challenge for them. And I think they've made a seamless process go into effect this year. And they're always very helpful to all of us if we have questions. They never say our questions dumb, or they're just there to, help us understand certain things.
Yeah, it's been quite a transition, I think, for
Mhm.
all of us. I think before we got on the live program, I said I've been boycotting Zoom calls as much as possible. But it's an uphill battle, but it's very impressive to see that shift and that pivot. Kind of thinking about, in your normal schedule, I know Joe and I we've met with you all on behalf of clients.
Mhm.
Just curious, I mean, from our standpoint, I'm always amazed about you're able to zero in on the contract and give you information in advance. But it seems to me that it's always been a beneficial process. How often do you meet with folks that, have awarded, or if there's an issue or whatever? My guess is fairly consistently, but just maybe some kind of color on that aspect as to how that may be helpful from your standpoint.
Yeah, if I just might tag one to the back of Brett's comment and question, is that the complexity, as Bob explained earlier with the procurement process, is by the time it gets to the Board of Public Works, it is choreographed very well. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, it's to move forward. If there are other questions that need to be answered, they're answered there. But it seems to me to flow very, very well and very well organized. I know there are times when that we'll get off track, but for all the complexity of that whole situation, my hat is off to all of you for the work that you do.
Yeah, I'd love to hear maybe Ann just kind of that perspective and being able to kind of hear more than just what you're hearing from an agency or what the verbiage is and how that may be helpful.
Sure. I mean, we do hear from, vendors who sometimes weren't awarded their contracts and their concerns. And so, we're happy to listen to them and hear their side of the story, I guess you could say. But another part of the job that I really enjoy is actually hearing from constituents who are interested in particular items. Usually it's something that they're passionate about. So maybe a particular wetlands license, which Joe kind of alluded to earlier, or a capital grant loan that an organization is receiving, or, an item that they maybe advocate for. So a pipeline or a new pier being built in their community. And I think that this is one important part of the process that we sometimes forget, that, part of the role of the Board of Public Works is to ensure we're doing right by the constituents as well, not just always, the fiscal sense. So, it's really nice to hear from constituents as well as, and they're interested in the process. They don't understand what the Board of Public Works is a lot of the time. So being able to explain that to them is something that I really enjoy as well.
How about you, Valerie?
Definitely. I mean, the meetings are very helpful. The more we're able to see both sides in advance, I think the better it is for everyone, so that we're able to meet with our principals in advance of the meeting. I know the governor loves to hear, both sides, what everyone is saying, what everyone is thinking, coming into the meeting. Instead of just getting blindsided by it, and maybe he didn't think. And of course, there's always, when we have speakers, there's always new information at the meeting, but just to have an idea going in of where everyone stands is incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for me as a procurement person, because I'm not really part of the constituent communication process. That's I guess if you look at it as a Venn diagram, so you have, sort of the politics and the public policy perspective. And then on the other side of the coin, maybe you have just the procurement process. And to the extent that they overlap is where that happens, I think, with the board. In my world, I'm just dealing with suppliers and contracts. The constituent piece is sort of a political component that might be through extension, but I'm after transparency, administrative efficiency, simplicity, fairness, open, fair rules. If the process and the outcomes and the procurement, supply demand dynamic are, at a high standard or high standard of integrity, in that process. And we do what we said we're going to do. We do it fairly and open. That's it for me. I don't do wetlands. I don't do oil wells. I don't do, airport flightways, all that stuff is more the political perspective that, thank goodness the Board of Public Works can deal with this. Thank you. I just do procurement.
Definitely. And I would say the piece that I just said, about hearing all the different perspectives, that was the wetlands, the pipeline, all of that. So the whole theory is, if Bob's team, they're training the procurement officers and everything is done with integrity and everything's done to his high standards, then we don't have as many issues that pop up as we are performing our due diligence and reviewing the items coming before the board.
And the weaknesses come out in the board, I think, like, for example, the single bids. I mean, to me, that is a symptom. It is a problem, but it's more of a symptom of the absence of procurement having done maybe some of their due diligence or some of the practice of procurement. There's nothing illegal about a single bid, but on the other hand, I don't know that professionally we've done enough to conjure up the competition that really is at the heart of public procurement. So it's more of a practice, and it's a best practice. And it's at the heart of public procurement. And we want to be fair and open with everyone. So why didn't anybody else compete? Well, we need to dig deeper on that. And sometimes it's training. Sometimes it's just suppliers don't even want to do business with us. And I have found that in the last 3 years. I've had a laundry list of people who've come to me and say, I'd rather do business in the district or in Pennsylvania or Delaware or Virginia rather than in Maryland because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. I want to make Maryland the customer of choice for every supplier that lives here, works here, employs people here. That's my goal.
Excellent. Thank you. Here's kind of a question for each one of you. We'll kind of go down the list of each. Start with Joanna. Give us an idea of your favorite part of the job and maybe the most challenging part.
I like a lot of variety in my day, so it's definitely for my personality and my thinking. It's a very good job for me because the issues change. I like consistency in how I do my job, but in terms of like the actual issues, it's very interesting. I used to be a lobbyist and I don't have to lobby anymore. And that to me is very, the most challenging part of my job, and I think we alluded to it earlier, is trying to explain an IT system to the treasurer, or, she will always have a question that I cannot answer and I have to go back and find it out. But just trying to kind of turn around and say, we have BWI has a contract coming for a new system, and this is what it is, and that's probably the hardest thing. And then just piecing together the different agenda items, because they're all standalone, but you sort of start to kind of get what's going on with different projects by looking at different similar contracts.
Yeah, excellent. How about you, Ann? I think you're
Sorry.
on mute. There you go.
So there's so many, I really do love my job, and there's so many aspects that I can talk about, but I think the thing, and I thought about this a lot, but what I really, really enjoy is, interacting with each state agency and learning about, the important work that they do. There's so many innovative projects and, initiatives that our state government is doing. And I really don't think people necessarily realize that. So I love learning from my colleagues and, at other state agencies, and, just really learning something new every day. And I can leave work every day and say, I have learned something new. And, it's exciting. It sounds kind of, lame, but it really is exciting. And another thing that I really enjoy is watching projects actually come to fruition. You'll see something or read about something in the newspaper that's finally having their, grand opening or something, and you look back and say, oh gosh, I remember when that item came to the Board of Public Works, 2 years ago or something like that. So, being able to watch these projects come together is really exciting. And then in terms of challenging, I think we're probably all kind of on the same page. We have a short period of time to really review and understand some of these really complicated and complex programs and, projects within state government. So, to really do a deep dive in such a short period of time can be challenging. But I will say the state agencies do a great job at making sure that we're prepared in advance and we know what's going to be coming to the board so that we can make sure our principal understands the issues and questions are addressed in advance. So.
Excellent. How about you, Valerie?
I concur with everything Joanna and Ann said.
I was hoping I wouldn't be last.
Trying to mix it up a bit.
It's exactly, there's never a dull moment. It's fascinating to get to hear especially right now during the pandemic.
Yeah.
All of what they're doing to meet and get to hear, operationally what they're carrying out, the ideas for these projects, and of course seeing it all come to fruition. Everything from the DNR park items that we're asked to approve, Project Open Space, MDOT projects, all of it. It's definitely interesting.
That's great. Bob, from your standpoint, I remember when I first met you, I think you had a flow chart that went basically the width of your office there. And give us an idea. I mean, your favorite part, you've done this in Virginia. You've taken on a sizable job here in Maryland. What do you love about it? What are you challenged by? I'd love to hear that perspective.
So I looked at that, the favorite part and the most challenging part. And my answer to both was people. So you're in the people business. It's relationship management. And it's I work for suppliers. We're all taxpayers. I work for the government. And so I think to me, that's one of the most rewarding things. And to Ann's point about seeing the completion and the fruition of something from beginning to end, when you build a beautiful contract that touches all the, ticks all the boxes, gets the public what they need, the suppliers benefit, the economy benefit. It's just a beautiful thing. And to me, that's very rewarding. It's all different. You can be buying body armor one week and the next week it's, I don't know, seedlings in the forest or something. I mean, it's just constant change. So you get to understand your client's business, sometimes better than them. And then understanding on the supply side of the equation, the suppliers that are in that niche. There's a culture, there's a language, there's a set of, there's an environment in which those suppliers operate. For a procurement officer to be able to understand that from a supply demand management perspective, it's just super cool. I think the challenge is back to the box, the small box of the requirements and the big box of what is possible. Building a culture of leadership is difficult. Many people like a checkbox. They follow the process, and the process might be perfect, but it's an utter failure in terms of a procurement. So getting people to think anytime you do anything innovative, that's new. And anytime you do anything new, people resist that. So overcoming that resistance to something new and different because it's not in the law, it's not in COMAR. We've never done it before. It's never worked before. Overcoming that, I think, is the challenge. But honestly, we've been very successful. It's back to stakeholder management, working with our suppliers, working with procurement officers. We're all trending in the right direction. I just can't get there fast enough, but we're getting there.
Yeah, that's great. And I think Joe and I probably would answer this question the same way. I mean, it's people, it's process. It's also feeling connected to our state. Joe and I, in Maryland, and it's pretty awesome experience to be part of it, both from a legislative, from the executive branch. Thinking back to being a kid going to Annapolis on a field trip, and now being in the mix of things, it's pretty awesome.
And I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I would say thank you and O-Line and others that do what you do, because you represent a universe of suppliers as their voice where they may not otherwise have that. So to be able to meet with us and talk about issues, I think is very valuable. So thanks to you guys too.
Well, we appreciate that. We appreciate the open doors and just the amount of talent that you guys bring to the table. It's awesome. I think anytime we have had those conversations with each of you, it's the people walk away like, wow, Maryland's really got some talent inside and doing some very good things. So we really appreciate that as well.
But we have a lot of rules and we have a lot of lawyers. So we gotta.
That's true. That's true.
But we're in good shape. The state is in very good shape, I think.
Yeah, it's great. Joe, you want to finish off with the final?
Yeah, I just had one final question. And Bob, everyone has done a great job of explaining your likes and dislikes and the nuances of what you do. But let's just say the board, all three members of the board said, Mr. Gleason, what is your ultimate vision for procurement in Maryland? What can we do to make the procurement process in Maryland better, or at least in your vision? How would you advise us? What would you tell us to do?
Well, having my three board advisors on the line, I'll be very sensitive, but I think my vision, and it's on our website, is I want Maryland to be sort of the center of excellence of state public procurement in the country. We're different than any other state. Our suppliers know that we're different. We operate differently. So I guess my vision, and I mentioned this earlier, I want Maryland to be the customer of choice for any supplier, especially if they're here in Maryland. And I don't want them going to another state or another jurisdiction to get business if they find it too difficult to do business here. So to the extent that we can work together to simplify, and rather to the extent that there are issues or mistakes or problems, if we can address things through a behavioral and a cultural and a training perspective, as opposed to creating another law, another regulation, another process. You know, we talk about belts and suspenders. We have belts and suspenders over belts. I mean, we have so much oversight that it sometimes it's almost like paralysis by analysis. And so if we can sort of break through some of that and allow practitioners to practice, and to the extent that they make a mistake, we deal with that. But we don't create another regulation that then punishes the rest of the state. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Very well said.
Yeah, that's great. And actually sent me an interesting little snippet just to give everybody, before we wrap up, some perspective on the state spending. 2019 expenditures were, almost 7.5 billion in expenditures, which was an increase of 2.23% from 2018. Total number of items, 1,862 done in 21 meetings. Average spending per meeting is 356 million. Is that right?
Wow.
Big numbers. Increase, again, same increase. In 2020, total expenditures of 11.9 billion, increase of 59.94% from 1,998 items, 22 meetings, average of 543 million per meeting, all done virtually, right?
Yeah, a lot of that, I think, comes from the pandemic. That's why the average for 2020 is pretty high. But yeah, all done virtually. So.
Yeah.
And I think that just reinforces the importance of the board. I mean, I think people sometimes perceive that the board is, oh, we have to go to the board. But there's a reason. I mean, the board brings transparency. They look at issues maybe in a different way sometimes. And I think it's really important just to remember. And it's not always the board that's the holdup for items coming to the board. Actually, it really isn't the board's. It's just the process for agencies to get their items to the board can take a while, but the board should never be perceived as the obstacle to getting something approved. That's what I'll leave it with that.
And we do have the board always mentioned in our AAA bond rating when the
Yes,
treasurer.
yes.
So,
Yes.
That's awesome. I mean, that's coveted. I don't know how many states still have maintained that, but Maryland has.
one of
all the way
13,
through.
I think.
Mhm.
Through the, the Great Recession and now this. I mean, it's really amazing. Makes me feel proud to be a taxpayer, really. Well, listen, we really thank everybody for all of your time, your candor, your incredible wealth of knowledge, and just the service that you provide to the state. Joe, do you have any other?
Well, I'm just
thoughts
grateful to
before we
have
leave?
this procurement brain trust all in one show today, one program. It's to have this level of expertise and to be able to talk about it. I just the last point that I wanted to bring up is that I think maybe it was Ann that mentioned the pandemic and different ways of doing things, but we may be seeing we're going to go back to face-to-face meetings at some point, but we may be seeing a different protocol in different industries or different services being brought to the state that were never thought of before the pandemic. And there may be a new way of doing business more efficiently, more economically, as a result of some of the innovations that have come across your desks. I'm just wondering whether you've seen that, or whether there's innovation that really needs to be emulated or look to the future for.
If I could just interject real quick, I think how we work together, when we work together, what are the tools that we use, technology tools? I think looking at EMaryland Marketplace Advantage,
Right.
it's allowed us to look at some of the ways we do our business from a different lens that can now project forward in the future so that we can integrate some of this new ways of doing business that we might not have been able to understand or to see, or we may have resisted prior to the pandemic. So I think that's, from office and, use, hoteling, teleworking. I know you hate Zoom, Brett, but there's Zoom. There's actually a program called Blue Jeans now. I had to learn that the other week. There's Google Meets. There's all these different things. They all have the same thing, but they're all different buttons, different places, right? So I think the future is going to be really exciting, and more excitement than maybe we need, but it is what it is.
Can I just say one more thing? I'm sorry. The one thing that I would be remiss in not mentioning is the treasurer is very passionate about climate change issues, and you will probably see more contracts to address some of the mitigation issues and adaptation issues with regards to climate change. So she's always bringing this. This is like her, in addition to her being the treasurer, this is her passion, and which is why she always brings it up at Board of Public Works. You will see a lot more of, you may see more expensive contracts because of the climate change.
Sure.
So
That's good to know. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Thanks again, everybody, for taking the time. And Valerie, that view looks pretty awesome back there as we head into the weekend. So wish everybody a wonderful weekend and stay safe. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
thank
Take care.
you.
Be safe.